It's no secret that Christianity is declining in America. In fact, Pew Research predicts that if the current trend continues, less than half of Americans will identify as Christian within the next 50 years. And the situation is even worse in the UK, where just 28% of respondents agreed to the statement that they believe in God or a higher power. And according to a recent study, UK membership has declined from 10.6 million in 1930 to just 5.5 million in 2010, or as a percentage of the population from about 30% to 11.2%. By 2013, this had declined even further to 5.4 million, or just 10.3%. And according to the study, if the current trend continues, membership will fall to 8.4% of the population by 2025. But why? Outside of America and Europe, the rest of the world is actually seeing a rise in Christianity. So why are Europe and America so unique? When it comes to America specifically, how could a country that was built on the core beliefs of Christianity lose its identity so quickly? While I do believe there are many outside forces, evil forces, insidiously acting on our culture to remove God altogether, I believe there's another reason the West has lost touch with Christianity, and it has everything to do with how modern Western society looks at the world. A groundbreaking psychological study in 2010 revealed a possible clue into this anomaly. Researchers discovered that European and American responses to psychological studies were often far removed from the typical responses of the rest of the world. They decided to do a comparison of cultural attitudes and differences between the various populations of the world. In several areas, Westerners' responses landed on the far end of the spectrum, and therefore, psychologists coined the acronym W.E.I.R.D, W.E.I.R.D, to portray the unique qualities of Euro-American attitudes, particularly those in the secular university world, and show how these attitudes consistently differed from the rest of humanity. The acronym W.E.I.R.D actually stands for Western Educated Industrialized, Rich and Democratic, meaning voting countries. Author Lois Verberg, in her book Reading the Bible with Rabbi Jesus, details how these traits of modern Western American culture are so far removed from the Middle Eastern reality of Jesus and the biblical world that we often either misunderstand the Bible, lack connection with it, or flat out disbelieve it. So let's take a closer look at this weird acronym. Western and educated. The way we formulate ideas as our Greek ancestors did is much different than the biblical Hebrews whom Jesus walked with. We, as in the weird culture, think in abstractions and find proof-based logical arguments far more convincing than the parables Jesus used. What does that mean? Well, Verberg points us to the reality that as children of the Enlightenment period, we have conquered the physical world, and science explains everything and leaves no room for the miraculous. Industrialized. As an industrialized world, the truth is we've lost our agricultural roots. Life is unrecognizable to times past, and most people are surrounded by concrete and technology 24/7. So gone are the days of working the fields alongside family through seasons of planting and harvest. For this reason, we don't relate to the many parables of Jesus about fishermen and farmers. It is utterly foreign to us, so as to not give us that visceral response like the parables intend to do. And unless people invest the time to understand the biblical world, they will make their own conclusions based on the judgments and criticisms of our modern culture. Rich. It's difficult for us to comprehend how poor ancient cultures were, and even those in the far parts of the world living today. The truth is, we are extremely rich in that we have easy access to food and shelter, and most of us are secure in our future. The fact of the matter is, the daily struggles of most people throughout history do not concern us, nor do they really even enter our mind. Verberg, in her book, points us to a parable about a farmer in the book of Luke, warning the reader against storing up riches for themselves. But as members of the weird culture, we don't see anything wrong with this farmer's actions. Let's read. Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God. This farmer who builds storehouses of crops so that he can retire to the easy life, paying himself first, would actually fit perfectly into the weird category where he is praised for saving his wealth and keeping it for retirement, creating what Verberg says in her book is the biblical equivalent to a Roth IRA. As fellow members of the weird culture, we don't see a problem with this man's actions. However, in much of the world and throughout history, this man's actions, his refusal to share his wealth with the community, would have been reprehensible. Democratic. Our culture is very familiar with government being by the people, for the people, and we value individualism and independence, defining ourselves in terms of our rights and our freedoms. And as much as our freedom has resulted in prosperity for so many, this idea of individualism over the group is a very foreign concept within the biblical narrative, and for many cultures across time and throughout the world, where personal autonomy is not an important value. Instead, they identify and view people as members of groups, such as families, tribes, and nations, focusing strongly on loyalty, and this worked for thousands of years. As a side note, I think a result of this lack of group identity that we are experiencing today, an identity that the church fulfilled for many years, but has recently broken down due to moral deficiencies in our culture, I think it has led to an identity crisis. Because humans have an inherent longing for purpose that can only be found in God, they are searching to fill that void, resulting in godless movements like the LGBT movement, gender ideology, new atheism, progressive Christianity, and even this hierarchical intersectionality movement. There's nothing inherently wrong with movements, but when they are founded on a lie, communities will become fractured and chaos will ensue. So, without a God-centered identity in our culture, we will continue to see further descent into madness and chaos. There was an interesting study on crowds that sought out to discover why certain crowds resulted in deaths and injuries while others didn't. The conclusion was that crowds that had a shared identity, whether it be religious or patriotic, did not have tragic outcomes. The individuals tended to look out for one another. However, when the crowds were pitted against each other, as in a situation where a limited number of items were for sale or space was limited in a venue, they saw these crowds become dangerous to the individuals within them, with the whole of the group moving in almost a liquid fashion, rippling through and literally crushing victims. The point is, we've lost our shared identity in God and truth, causing so many to splinter off into various groups, each pitted against each other. Now, back to our weird culture and how it prevents us from truly understanding the Bible, we have to ask the question, why would God create a book that would one day be so difficult to understand by those living at a time when there are more Christians than ever before? Why would he not give us a book that stands the test of time? The truth is, he has. In fact, millions upon millions living today in the global south, including Asia, Africa, Latin America, and in many other places, actually make up Christianity's most expansive growth in history. And it is these very cultures that still hold on to biblical thinking and values. No wonder Christianity is exploding in these regions. So it's not that the Bible wasn't made for such a time as this. I believe our weird culture is witnessing a falling away just like Jesus described in the Gospels. And the farther we drift culturally and psychologically from the truth, the more in danger we become of losing our faith altogether, either resulting in alienation from God or judgment, which is actually the better option because it means God has not given up on us yet. Thank you and God bless.